Hey all, welcome to the very well organized Game Jobs panel. I'm your host, panelist, and moderator studio. Nope. Just telling Muncha that he should come to the panel right now. Essentially, this panel is to go over what it is like to get a job in gaming, how you can kind of take that route there, how it ties into speedrunning at like a micro level and kind of a macro level, and some of the pluses and minuses, and there will be minuses for sure about game jobs in general. For context, I work for MZ or Machine Zone. It is a mobile games company. Not really speedrunnable games at all. And I work there as a project manager. So at other companies, this would be a producer role. Tech companies would be project manager. It really kind of depends on context for that. It is my job not to design or engineer, but to be really well organized and kind of watch the work production and guide my teams towards hitting a certain goal. So for example, let's say we have a project where we have to hit a certain deadline. I will help in coming up with requirements for that project, with ways that we're going to hit the milestone alongside other people. And then at my role as a project manager, I will do the follow-up to make sure that we're getting resources we need from other teams, we're getting resources we need from ourselves, that people aren't getting distracted by other work. It ends up being a lot of kind of just tracking to make sure that other people with other needs don't come in and take my guys for stuff that we need them to do at a really basic level. MunchaKoopas is on the way. I will let him introduce himself when he is ready to. And for context, like working in mobile games ends up being quite different than an indie studio. And also my company is about probably 700 people right now. So it is a large company versus smaller studios. So I actually manage 2 out of like probably 12 or 14 engineering teams. I don't know off the top of my head. And our focus is entirely on like tooling and support for game management. Hey, Muncha.
Hi.
He made it. It's at 4:30 apparently.
Cool. I wish Darkman had told me that. He told me 7:30 p.m. I'm sorry, studio.
No problem. So I was introducing myself, what the panel was about, and you can introduce yourself.
Cool. Move this closer. Hi, I'm MunchaKoopas. I work at Yacht Club Games. They hired me to be a quality assurance tester. I've been working there for about a year. It's a lot of fun. Let me catch my breath.
And so, kind of, we're gonna go into like how we got our jobs was one of our goals, and I'll let you once you're ready, like go into like what is a day for you at Yacht Club.
First, Pepsi.
Did you watch Pepsi Man? Is that where the Pepsi's from?
No, I bought this an hour ago.
Okay.
Let's see. Well, how I got my job is actually I asked. The longer story is, of course, I've done speedruns of Shovel Knight since it launched. And I was an alpha tester for Plague Knight, not paid, but they just said, hey, we want you to try this and give us some feedback. And then they did the same for that with Spectre Knight. And I'm not the only one that does that. Some of the other speedrunners get access to those alphas. But I actually did remote paid testing for Yacht Club in January and February of 2017 to help them finalize the Spectre of Torment patch. And then I actually interviewed for a job at a company we know very well, but I won't mention by name because that would be bad. But I didn't get it, and I was very sad. And I thought, what could I do? Because I was working a job I hated at the time. So I knew Yacht Club would need testing later in 2017 for King Knight. And I thought, okay, I'll work my job for the summer, save up, and then reach out to them and find out when they need people. So I reached out to Shane, the engine programmer there, who is my contact, in addition to Adam, the QA lead at Yacht Club. And I said, hey, I'm looking, when do you guys need testers? I'll save up and then look for a place and figure it out from there, because I just want to change in my life. And they said, we need people now. When can you get here? So I packed my things, and a month later, I moved to LA, and I've been down there ever since. I'm also involved with a project called Heartforth Elysia, which basically the same thing. I just asked the developer on Twitch, hey, do you need testers? I'd love to help. Thinking, oh, they wouldn't, they'd just say, oh, no, thank you, I'm good. And they said, no, I'd love to have you. I just saw your SGDQ run. That was great. And I was like, what? It's literally that easy sometimes.
But I mean, for context, getting the yacht club position required you to speedrun the game 4 years. So to even become on the radar, you had to be a world record holder doing SGDQ runs.
Yeah.
And then even then, it wasn't a thing where they're just like, "Hey, get a job." You had to ask after also having been contract for them for a bit.
Yeah, I was one of their original guinea pigs for their quality assurance test. I guess we'll get into that a bit later, like art
Yeah.
tests and everything. Just for anyone unaware, if you apply at a game developer, they'll give you a test for programming or art or whatever, and quality assurance is no different. And I can't really divulge too much about the test, but I can say that I have the highest score currently of anyone they've ever tested at Yacht Club, and I took it for fun because Shane asked me to. And I emailed him a week later, like, so I haven't heard back. How did I do? He said, oh, you beat 3 people with 20 years experience. Oh. Okay. Can you hire me now? But yeah. So.
My route was a little different too, because I'd previously been staff for Games and Quick. I worked as media relations manager for this event, which someone else took the role once I got hired full time, and. Because I've been working for them, I think it was 3 years when I was applying to positions, and I'd also had, like, if you go back far enough, I did a bunch of League of Legends casting. I had a degree from Berkeley. Like, I had a lot of experience built up, and I was just getting nothing when I applied for jobs. Like, I'd get nothing back, or the 2 weeks later, it's like, we looked at your applications, we strongly considered you, but we're gonna have to pass them. We're so sorry. We'll hold your application for 6 months and just never talk to you again. So there was a post on the Something Alpha forums, and it was a guy saying, "Hey, I'm looking for someone for entry-level production." And like, I'm like, you know what? Sure, I don't really know this company or know a lot about production, but I'm trying to find anything at this point. So I sent the most non-committal message with a resume attached. It's like, hey, this looks pretty cool, but I'm not really sure I know what I'm getting into. But hey, you should take a look at this anyways. And he had seen GDQ and like loved GDQ, and it's like, well, you were a GDQ guy, and I've seen your runs. Like, you should totally apply to this and like go full force into it. And so like I think I sent a message. It was early November 2016, and then by mid-November I'd had an on-site interview, and by returning from like Thanksgiving break, I'd gotten the job offer, barring the 2-week background check. And it was this weird thing of just like, I kept trying to go the normal routes over and over and over and over. And I think the problem is those entry-level positions, so many people apply for them that like there was no feedback whatsoever. And then by going through like a forum post on a internet board that has been relevant for like 13 years, landed me like my first position. And it also had entirely to do with the fact that I'd been part of GDQ and like had GDQ experience. And it was still only an entry-level position. It's like, realistically, like, probably could have dove into something a little bit higher up. But the guy's just like, well, you don't have anything official for it. And that's kind of like, the story you'll hear from a lot of people is, once you get a games job, it's much easier to get more games jobs. And I think that is entirely true.
Yeah.
Because the thing we had to do for our positions is you have to sort of prove yourself. And different roles have different ways to prove yourself. Because you have a quality assurance position for a small studio.
Yes.
And have you heard anything about quality like QA for large publishers? These are usually the big example.
I've heard stories from my coworkers, but I'm not sure what the application process is exactly. I imagine it's similar to what I did, but a lot
more
strict.
like quality of the job.
Oh, no, you don't want to do that.
It's like long hours. You report bugs that nobody will care about. You're constantly switching projects to things you don't care about.
Yeah.
In the end, it's like nobody cares about you or what you're doing, and you're not paid very much. And there's no path out of there.
Yeah, I could share one short story from a coworker of mine. He used to work at Activision. He was a tester on Guitar Hero 2. He's really good at Guitar Hero, as you might imagine. But he said that when he was working as a tester for Activision or Harmonix, whichever one was publishing it, they actually had to go, all the QA team had to go in the building around the back through like an industrial entrance and like go through these tight corridors and everything. Like no one in the building was supposed to know you worked there. That's how you get treated.
Yeah. And that's kind of like just almost like the horror of just starting out in games is, a lot of positions, they will treat you like dirt because they make an assumption that is kind of correct, and that like there's a lot of people that will take your position, and if you're good at it, they don't necessarily expect a lot of return off individuals, so they don't try and like cultivate people to move them up. So like QA at a publisher, you may just get treated like dirt, and they may just never treat you like a full human being, especially compared to other employees. And sometimes that can be a route to get to a better position. Sometimes you can just be stuck there just forever. Like, I think that was something that we were discussing this too, is advancement's kind of a big thing in this industry as well, because you don't want to stay entry level, because if you stay at entry level, you're just going to get kind of smacked around a bunch.
Yeah.
Because, like, I like my role, but I'm still, like, I got promoted, I'm still relatively junior, so if I want to make cool decisions and, like, we should do this cool thing for this project, I have to convince people above me to convince people above me to convince people above me to even listen to what I'm saying. So it gets really hard just to get anything. Like, I can do stuff that keeps the process moving, but it gets hard for me to like have any input. And it's also tougher because I am at a bigger company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I acknowledge that I am extremely lucky. Don't get me wrong, I earned this position to some extent, but if Yacht Club were not in the position they're at, I wouldn't have this job. So I understand that very well.
Yeah. And to say kind of like, well, it's like, if I want a games job, what do I do? The answer seems to be set yourself apart in some way, which can vary. Speedrunning's pretty good about this because more developers and more just people at companies are showing up to these events. So for example, like a really easy example is if you're interested in Twitch, there's like 1 billion Twitch employees here now. And you can introduce yourself to them, and like they're wearing hoodies and they're usually pretty friendly. And if you talk to someone and just like, hey, you know, like I'm blank, be a human being, like don't just be like, yo, get me a job, but like, hey, I'm studio, I do this now. Like, who are you? Oh, well, what do you do for Twitch? Oh, you do partnerships, you do engineering, you do this one thing. Hey, I have questions about this other role. Do you know anything? And like people realize, like it's a very give and take kind of thing. Where I got lucky for my position, I got so much advice from other people that like if somebody asked me a question, just like, hey, how can you help me out? It's like I'm not gonna like roll over and give a recommendation immediately. But it's like if you have questions, if there's ways I could guide you and like help you find something that you could like, that's how a lot of people kind of operate in this space from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So like social networking is like one of the biggest ways you can just try to get that edge.
Mm-hmm. And like sometimes like it on top of social networking, sometimes just applying to a job can be your social networking because maybe the company you're applying to like isn't hiring, but maybe they know people that are, and it's another way to build up your list of contacts. So when you do need a job, you have a better chance of finding one.
It's like you're pretty much setting like flags down. It's like I'm not going to necessarily get every job I apply to, but like if you meet and have an interview and have like a really good interview with someone, and they come back later and it's like, sorry man, we closed a position where we found someone else. Like maybe that guy can say that contact you had originally can be a contact for the future. Mm-hmm. Additionally, setting yourself apart is you also have to, it depends on what role you're doing. Production, actually, I'm kind of unique in that I got a production role for entry level. Most people I know go through QA into production or design into production. Or actually production and design. Like people kind of crisscross that a lot.
Yeah.
But if you're doing QA, for example, and you want to do production, it's like, maybe you take project management courses. Maybe you take something relevant strictly to the discipline. Design, I think, is the big one that we talked about. If you want to be a designer, you have to prove that you can design, which is like it almost seems kind of obvious, but even getting that barrier of just like what's the stereotype of the ideas guy? It's like I got a cool idea for a game, and it's like that's cool. Everybody does. You have to be able to say like, well, I have a cool idea for a game. Here it is, prototype. Here it is. I made a level in Mario Maker that reflects what I would do if I had my own engine, but I don't, so I'm using the resources I can.
Yeah, like for Yacht Club's intern applications, especially, I mean, I'm just going to focus on design at the moment because that's what we're on, but like Studio said, if you have anything that shows you that you've made any attempt at making a game, that like speaks volumes about your willingness and like your work ethic. Because like we get a ton of applications that like they've never made anything, and not even in Game Maker or Mario Maker or whatever. So if you have anything like that, even a short demo, it could just be like one room and some mechanics where you jump around, and that's fine. Like that immediately says to the developer that you are super interested and you have some idea of what you want to do. So
yeah, because it's kind of a hard thing to be like if you don't have proof to say like, yeah, I can make a fun game. It's like, well, you don't know that. And you probably can, but you got to show it in some way.
Yeah.
I think additionally to one of the big aspects is you have to learn tons of new tool sets for any role. QA, you learn bug tracking software. Production, you learn project management software and bug tracking software. Engineers are learning tons of new languages. Designers learn tons of new scripts. So being able to say you can use the tools that are relevant is also pretty important. So like if you go through job applications, you just be like, there's always like a little bonus section, just like bonus. You can use Jira, you can use this bug tracking software, you can use MySQL queries for analysts, or you know, what would it be? Lua for scripting.
Yeah.
And like all these like little things, and like being able to say just like I know a bit about it can actually be a huge plus too. It's like it's a weird thing. So you build this base of just like what is the good job applicant is like someone that is preferably knows somebody at the company, preferably has something to show off that's really relevant for the role. QA I think is actually an interesting one because speedrunning is really good about that, because glitch hunting and documenting it well is like the QA dream. It's like, hey, here's a bug you can do. Here are the perfect repro steps for it. And here's how consistently you can do it. That's kind of like speedrunning in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And like if you can put that on a ticket in a production base, someone can decide whether to fix it later.
Yeah.
And like this is kind of like the beginning of an application. And once you start getting an application like this, your odds go from like, I want to say probably like 1 or 2% per application to like get noticed just substantially higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I did apply for Yacht Club, but that was just a formality. In my case, I didn't have to apply, so I mean, I can't really speak too much about applying.
Yeah.
This is my only game dev job, but
yeah, and well, really, that's kind of a weird thing. Is like our jobs, like we kind of got them before we applied for them. Like I had a huge one up, and it was because I still interviewed to prove like I'm a human being. I'm not gonna hate you.
Yeah.
And I still had to interview, but like the actual application process was almost decided before we applied.
Yeah.
And that's it's a weird thing because that's what a lot of gaming companies are like. I was speaking to someone that works at Blizzard, and I said like, well, okay, how would someone get into Blizzard design or Blizzard production? It's like, what's the route? Because I imagine, like, I'm curious because there's got to be a ton of ways people get in. And he was telling me it's like, well, most people actually, like not most, but a substantial amount of people go from QA or CS in their Texas office. Which if you've ever played WoW and like contacted a CS agent, they're in Irvine, California for the HQ, but all the CS agents are actually in Texas, and they spend 2 years working there. The ones that really spend a lot of time trying to learn from their managers and just like outside sources, like how to design, how to produce, end up getting promoted to the junior positions at Blizzard. So it's like, well, you probably won't get a associate designer, associate producer Blizzard position because you're going up against all these internal applicants that they know way better, and that's fine. You just gotta be aware. It's like if you want to land a Blizzard job, which I imagine a ton of people would, you're looking for that down the road if you don't go through that company immediately.
Yeah.
And like different companies have all these different cultures, and it's a mess to actually figure out. So you got to be kind of tenacious about this. Like I graduated from college 2015, and did not actually start a like full-time good position till 2017 at the beginning of the year.
Same.
So it took me like a year and a half.
Yeah, I graduated in 2014. Mind you, I was a music major, so I had no prospects.
I was American Studies.
All right, high five.
I mean, I love my major. Completely relevant to everything I do today. A little bit, mostly relevant.
But yeah, like Studio said, it is more about who you know, and in addition to what you can do, but a lot of it is who you know and just having a good rapport. You know, like Yacht Club already knew me before I worked there. Like I had met them at some point. I visited their office in 2016, so it's not like they had never interacted with me before that in any capacity, aside from the GDQ stream.
Yeah, who you know, and not who you are, but how you can present yourself. If I can be like, I'm a cool guy with cool engineering or skills, it's really useful. And then we're going to talk about how I tied into speedrunning too. So I mentioned being able to record glitches ends up being strong. I think having such a strong hobby itself can be really useful, especially if you have somewhere where you can say like, I was part of this GDQ commentary. I was part of like this is not going to be like resume speedrunner first box, but it's something where it's like you can put down like, oh yeah, by the way, I was like on couch or I ran this game with these marathons. And people will be like, that's cool. It's one of those little things that will help set you apart. Because being able to show that you have these passion projects ends up being pretty useful. Yeah,
I mean, obviously learning about how the game works and being able to explain it in like the way that you think it works, it helps, like, at least I would assume it helps the developers realize that you have the analytical mind or like the same type of analysis that they might make. One of the designers at Yacht Club likes to joke that I can see the matrix because as soon as something is implemented, I usually find a way to break it very quickly. Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. Like if you look at Shovel Knight, like all the art in the game is of course on a grid, and so all the waterfalls and background tiles are actual individual little squares. When I look at the waterfalls, I don't see one whole waterfall anymore. I actually see the grid around them, and it gets it's a little sad sometimes. But I like having this ability, if that makes sense.
And that's kind of the follow-up is, if you get a job in gaming, it will ruin games forever.
Yeah, it makes you very cynical. Yeah. Mostly just, I mean, when you get to the higher echelons of like any profession or any like sport or hobby or whatever, people are going to have strong opinions. And game developers have very strong opinions. I sometimes wonder if my coworkers even like video games until I see them playing video games and see the smiles on their faces. But it's very easy to pick apart a game's skeleton without looking at its skin. And what I mean by that is like, the first thing I notice when I play a game is the mechanics. How do things interact? What in a level can I like exploit to get around obstacles, which isn't like an ordinary thing to do, whereas other people are like, oh, I love this art, or I love the way this is presented, I like the music, and to me those are secondary thoughts. My first thought is, what is this and how can I break it, which is sometimes sad for me.
Yeah, which is, I'm lucky because being in mobile games, it's only mobile games that I deal with, and so like if I play a mobile game now, it's like I will point out the monetization model within like probably a minute of being the tutorial. Of just like, this is how they're going to make money for you. This is how much this will cost you. I can't give an exact number, but it's like playing Clash Royale for example. I could tell it's like, this is going to be like probably $40 to like get really far at the beginning, and then there's going to be a plateau after about maybe like $80, and it will take hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get over that plateau and like compete, and then thousands to compete with people on the next level. And it's just like I could spot that right away, and I actually still play the game, and it's like, yeah, that's what it's like. That's exactly what this monetization model is.
Yeah.
So you end up like getting really good at reducing games to some bare bones concepts.
Yeah. Every week at Yacht Club, I want to mention this real quick. Every week we walk around and see what everybody's been working on, the artists, the programmers, whatever. And my favorite is when we get to the level designers, of course, or the programmer that's making one of the bosses, because it just gives me the first look to look at it and go, how can I get out of this boss room, or how does this level just not... How can I like do something unintended here? And that is my first thought whenever I see their levels. So it changes the way you think, the more you work in it.
And what if I told you I could offer you positions in an industry that will have you work more hours, get paid less, be incredibly volatile in terms of actually having a job long term, and may not have obvious room for growth or improvement? Because that's like the other downside of game jobs is, they're kind of worse from like a numbers perspective from like every other job ever. Mm-hmm. It's like, if I'm a project manager at my company, my company actually pays decently, but if I was a project manager just in gaming as a whole in the Bay Area, which is where I live, I'd probably make $30,000 less versus someone working at, let's say, Apple or Google or something like that. If I was like a entry level at this point, I'd be making like $40,000 less. Like the actual pay difference between gaming and like kind of normal tech companies, which would be the closest comparison, it's massive. Because gaming companies, some of them actually pay okay, but usually they pay less than the tech companies you would be working for pay substantially more.
Yeah, and that's true of all roles, including programmers. So, I mean, the programmers are still paid well for their work, don't get me wrong, but like, you're going to make more money programming medical software than you will making video games. Likewise, I would make more money testing medical software than I would testing video games, but it's not nearly as fun.
I actually know someone who went from QA at Riot to QA for a medical device company to lead their division. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I realized why he'd left is he'd been there for years and enjoyed it, but he was looking for advancement, and that was going to be where he found it.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is it is also something very fulfilling and like immediately fulfilling. Mm-hmm. It's like if I get a project done and like I've been playing it with like playing alongside it with QA for like, you know, days or weeks, and like we finally get that thing live and I'm able to go ahead and like mess around with it myself and like do all these cool things. Like I would not get that at other companies. If I was working for like an ad agency, I'd be like, that's a cool marketing campaign. Let's watch it slowly distribute to ad networks over the course of the next few months. If I was working for a medical software company, like I would not be able to go I would not be able to go ahead and like engage with it and watch it get used and like enjoy it myself.
Yeah. Like one experience that sticks out for me is before PAX what was the most recent one? East, one in Boston, right?
East, yeah.
Yeah. We had a Shovel Knight demo there of King of Cards. And the night before, it was me, my lead, and one of the programmers. We were at the office until 2 in the morning, testing the build and making sure it worked. And Studio, you might have some experience with this, but as you might know, the later you get into a project, especially when you have a deadline, of course you're going to find a crash at 1 a.m.
Yeah.
And so I left the office at 2:30, knowing that people would be lining up to play the demo tomorrow morning at PAX, and they would most likely have no issues. And that made me feel very fulfilled, and like the work I was doing mattered. So like Studio said, it's a very fulfilling industry to work in if you don't mind some of the negatives. But I mean, I'm the happiest I've ever been at working. So
yeah,
rose-colored glasses.
So I'm doing pretty okay now. It's like I like my position, I like my company, but it can vary, and you'll hear about horror stories where it's like people will be at this company for like years and they're working like 80, 90-hour weeks, not getting paid very well. It's like, well, why? It's like, well, they like the end product and they're kind of destroying themselves now. That's kind of the other aspect is like if you find a gaming job and it's awful and you hate it, like if you want to stay in the industry, it's like realize it can get better, but it'll generally not be the perfect place. There are a few companies that I've heard good things about, like Clay apparently adheres really strictly to 40-hour weeks. They make Don't Starve. Supercell, I've heard good things about for Clash Royale for like their Swedish office, which might be Sweden specific. Shout out to Sweden. And like it'll be company to company. It'll be office to office or even team to team within the office. And the other downside is that like it's volatile. I could get laid off any day, and I would be like, well, yeah, that's kind of what I expected. Gaming, woohoo.
Yeah, like when King Knight is done, what do I do?
Yeah.
I guess I'll keep playing Shovel Knight. It hasn't steered me wrong so far.
It's a hits-based industry, which is actually kind of changing to a degree, because Overwatch is a good example, or Fortnite, where they have a lot of in-game cosmetics, and that actually, or League of Legends actually, where the games sustain themselves over time. But if you think about a traditional AAA game, if that game doesn't sell well day one, and you were working on that game and you weren't in like one of the most critical roles, you'll probably get fired, and they'll be like, "Sorry, we didn't make enough money to keep your job here." And different companies have different approaches from it. Some companies will just hire and fire like as needed immediately. Other people will try and slowly hire so they don't have to immediately fire if things don't turn out well. And it's definitely like you will hear all kinds of stories, and even the companies that try and do it the best may not be able to sustain well. Because the problem with hits-based games is if you can have hits and do really well, and then years later, if you don't have a hit, then you may not have a company anymore.
Yeah, a lot of my coworkers, like the main people at Yacht Club, they've worked together for years at another company. I won't get into that, but like they did say that when they were there were certain times where they'd finish a game and then like 80% of the company would just be laid off, and then they'd have a new round of people, and it gets demoralizing and weird because you see all your friends leave and you like form these bonds, and that a good video game does not generally make when you lose people that you are creatively compatible with. But that's the industry sometimes. So.
Yeah, it's a hard truth of just like, yeah, sometimes we'll just lose everybody, and all the knowledge, all of the work culture, all of that stuff just kind of dissipates, gets rebuilt, and like that's why a lot of sequels, if it was within an unstable company, you're rolling the dice on quality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a negative. The positives really are just like, it's a cool product and you like what you do. I will say the parties are pretty good, and you can go to E3 for free, that's nice. It's a weird thing to be like, yeah, E3. It's like I don't really want to go to it that much because you eventually get access and you realize it's a cool thing to go to like once, but then it's just afterwards you can be a hipster and just be like, yeah, don't need to go.
Yeah, I went to my first one this year, and my coworkers were right. It is kind of a pointless event now. But as someone who had always wanted to go since I was 14, I was giddy as a schoolgirl looking around, and it is cool to see. But it is kind of a pointless event now. Sorry to burst anyone's bubble, but
yeah. You'll find funny things there. For example, every now and then it's just a booth that like has nothing in it because the company has to keep paying for their booth or they'll lose their spot. I think it was I think I saw Konami's booth before they kind of pulled out of games, and it was just like a carpet and a small little like fake constructed building that like had nothing in it. And it's just like, all right, I guess you guys aren't really trying to be big right now. Let's see. So that's kind of like the positives, the negatives, the how you do it, and the how you do it. Like we said, will depend on every position. Our artist friend, if he was here, I'll pretend he's here, would have said stuff about like having your art be able to match that of the companies. So, for example, we went into this. We actually have a mutual friend that got a job at Blizzard, and he's an incredibly good artist, but he wasn't comfortable going full on with his application until he'd spent like a substantial amount of time building up a portfolio that was similar to Blizzard's existing games. And he'd actually done contract work for Hearthstone. Like he was not a unfamiliar artist to them. And even then, he's like, until he'd had his own experience working at our company, and actually built up this large kind of very Warcraft themed portfolio because that guy loved Warcraft. He was just not comfortable. So it was like it took him a substantial amount of time, and he landed the position. And as far as I can tell, it was a pretty smooth process. But it took him like constructing a very specific portfolio. And it really depends. If a company has a lot of applicants, they can be a bit more judgmental with that. If it's a little bit rougher a position, you can probably get in with something broader. Engineering is the one that we really haven't talked about because we're not engineers.
Yeah. I interact with a couple of them that help like speed along my building process, but
I mean, I've interviewed engineers, and it's just like on that point, it's like my goal is to be like, hey, if I tell you to do something, could you do it? Oh, you can't. You would? All right, cool. I'm gonna have to trust you on that. Thank you. But in general, the engineering tends to be very code specific. So can you work with the code, the language they expect you to know? If they have anything proprietary, like some weird internal scripting that you need to learn as well, yeah, they will not test you on it, but be like, hey, can you learn new languages? And then additionally, like it really comes down to code tests, and can you display that you can code both well, and this is the big one, is quickly. Because games have such tight deadlines and timelines, you can't just say like, oh, I'm a good coder. It's like, okay, but if it takes you 60 hours to do something really well, that would take someone 40 hours to do kind of okay. We actually want the okay code. Like we don't want perfect code necessarily, or perfect art, or perfect design.
Yeah, you can fix that later.
Yeah, it's like if it's a weird thing to say. It's like you will have to often trade quality for quantity depending on the position, and sometimes it gets fixed, sometimes it doesn't. I think you can kind of tell in games where and this is completely off the dark, and I don't actually know if it's true. Anybody here play Mafia 3?
No.
No? Okay, I'm the only person. All right. So I played Mafia 3, and they repeat the same mission structure every single time. And I think that ended up being a case where they just went for pure quantity over quality. Because every mission is just like, okay, you got to kill these two sub guys to kill this big guy, kill these two sub guys to kill this big guy. Then you kill the big guy in that area that was the big guy for the two other big guys. You repeat that 3 times, and you kill a big boss. And it's like, that's not super cool. It's like, I like the game, but it's like, I really did the same thing too many times for like 10 extra hours. So you will see that like in action, the quantity versus quality. Yeah. Do we have anything else to cover? Kind of give the spiel. The here's why you shouldn't do it. It is fulfilling when it works. Like I will say, like if you could find a company you like that treats you well, it is a super great position. And leaving games, which is this is the Games Job channel. Here's how you get out. Is actually not that hard. Most positions are transferable. Design is probably the weirdest one that would be hardest to transfer, especially like something specific like a level designer. But like quality assurance, production, engineering, art, sound, marketing, whatever you're part of, can usually transfer to another team or to another company or industry.
Yeah, because like art isn't just the art that's in the game. It's also Steam banners, key art that's used on advertisements. The cover of your game box that displays in Target ads, that's also super important. So like you're not just going to be a pixel artist or a 3D artist. And like that, I think our artist for our illustrations, we hired him out of a t-shirt shop because we saw his work and loved it so much. Yeah, sometimes you just get lucky like that and people find you.
Marketing art. And actually, like for example, big live games will have way different needs than small games. And actually, we can talk about that really quickly. Is like my team is massive compared to your team.
Yeah.
And we focus a lot more on tooling because we have this kind of like we have larger games and we have so many people that are touching them that it actually becomes important that we have all these simpler processes for people to touch the game. This is true of like World of Warcraft, of any large game will have like a massive tooling support. Mm-hmm. And then I imagine Yacht Club probably doesn't do a lot tooling specific. Like you guys maybe something for the level designers, and maybe something for QA, but realistically, not everybody needs to control as much of the game that often, so you don't need all these like massive tooling teams.
Yeah, I mean, the most complex thing I use is debug mode, which just has like console commands and a fly cheat, etc. But like we don't have like an AI that's going around playing Shovel Knight looking for minor bugs.
Yeah.
I guess something I can mention is like for big games, the Horizon Zero Dawn team, that game is massive, and they actually programmed AI to just run around the map until they found a crash, and then report that crash. And like the bot would just run around, like pick up, and it was programmed to like pick up the nearest item and try to craft. If it couldn't craft, keep looking until it found more items. Find an enemy, fight the enemy, and just all these things. And so you have all of that type of testing on top of humans doing other things. And both types are equally important because they're going to catch different things. Like it would make no sense for a human tester to sit there and try and jump in the same pixel perfect location, hoping for some random bug to happen. Like something that can happen in Spectre of Torment is you can jump off of a dirt block as Spectre Knight, and if you do it on the right frame, the block won't break. I'm not going to reproduce that because that's a waste of my time. But a bot can do that all day long.
Yeah, and like it's actually something where like you're seeing a lot more of just automated testing. Because before it would have been a guy, like 20 years ago, it would have been a person just jumping on a block for like 4 hours straight. All right, this block's good. On to the next block. All right, this block's bad. They should fix this block, and then repeat.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that's true. You have to test every single block because they all count as different assets. One time in Shovel Knight, we had there's a little red enemy called a Beto, and for some reason, one enemy in the first level was just walking straight into a wall. It was the only one in the entire game. We don't know why. It was fixed, but yeah, sometimes things just happen for no reason.
Yeah. Actually, the last thing I think before Q&A is, have you heard the door question before?
The door question. Oh, yes. Like, what do you do? Doors are implemented in games. Everyone has a different perspective about them.
So, like, all right, you want to put a door in a game, and you ask each different member of the team, like, okay, we're putting in a door in a game. What do you want to know? So, for example, for me, it would be, when do we want the door in the game? What would the door in the game be for you?
For me, it would be like, what does the door look like? Does it have any specific animations or art? I walked through the door, I jumped at the door, I threw grenades at the door, I stood in the door for 10 minutes while it closed to see if anything happened, etc., etc. Any interaction you think of, I will have to try until I find something that breaks or I determine that the asset is perfectly fine.
And then the designer might be, it's like, well, do we need one door? Does this door need to have any other properties? Does the player walk through the door automatically? Can you open the door and look through the door? And this would be the designer actually coming up with these questions and probably answering himself.
Yes.
And then the engineer would be like, how many times does this door need to exist? Do I have to make it so the designer can put in a lot of these doors? How do these doors connect to each other? Do we need this? When do we need this door so I can figure out how good to make this door? If it's the only door that we make, can I make it a hard-coded door? Don't do that ever.
Nope.
Every time you say, yeah, we're gonna use this once, it's never been used once before. Art will be like, what does the door look like? What's the aesthetic of the door? The engineering team for like the actual game engine, do we need shaders for this door? How do we light up this door? It's a fun question because you can go through every different team. From even marketing is like, all right, can we make this door look cool? Are we allowed to spoil this door?
Yeah.
It's like the door question is just kind of like you find out how you fit into a company just by being like, yeah, what do we do? What the hell do we do with the door?
Yeah, and like your first instinct with what do you do with the door, whether you think art, programming, whatever, that like it can give you a good indication of what sort of game industry job you would want. At least I would think so.
Maybe. And that's the thing is it's actually pretty easy to pivot outside of technical positions. And even then, I've heard a lot of people go into like, maybe not necessarily hardcore engineering, but you can probably do some web applications.
Yeah.
Without too much training. It'd be like 6 months to a year, I'd say.
Yeah. I think our operations manager at Yacht Club, she uses WordPress a lot for the Yacht Club website. And she's not a programmer by trade, but she just does all the like accounting and other miscellaneous things that are still incredibly important. You have no idea.
Oh yeah, it's like you can find accounting jobs in gaming. You can find server maintenance for internal tools like Jira. You can find Jira administrator positions. Like every gaming company has like every position imaginable, and it's funny. Sometimes they'll get condensed in the smaller company.
Yeah. I mean, it just depends on what that company can afford and where they're at in their own, history, I guess.
Yeah. All right. We should take questions, I think.
I think so,
Like
yeah.
20 minutes, right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. All right. What up?
I've got a question for you. So I'm just curious about the general size and structural organization of Yacht Club. Like, how many people are there overall, and how many roughly of each position? Also, do you all work in the same place?
All right.
We should repeat the questions
Yes.
because it won't get picked up on mic.
All right. The question was in relation to Yacht Club games, like how big is the team, like the total team at the company, how many of each role specifically, and I think there was one more. Did I? You're good. Oh, are there any remote employees? To answer those in the reverse order, there are no. Well, we don't have any remote employees that are like full-time Yacht Club employees. I don't even know if I'm allowed to divulge this. I think so. Like we have friends of the company that do various things. Like we have an outside programmer that specializes in Android programming. Shovel Knight is released on the Amazon Fire TV and runs on an Android system. So like we have one guy that handles that. As far as there's about 16 people at the company, including myself, not counting interns, and then maybe about 3 or 4 of each other role, like QA, art, programming, etc. And the most distinguished are probably like the programmers. Because like we have the gameplay engineers that focus primarily on Shovel Knight, and then we have like build engineers that focus on improving the tools or anything in the Yacht Club might want in the future. The artists can kind of all do a little bit of everything, but when they're working at Yacht Club, we have 2 main pixel artists and one that's doing the key art and illustrations and whatnot. So yeah, about 3 or 4 for each position. There's 3 QA people, like me and another contracted employee and our lead. Yeah. Relatively small. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of gaming companies are actually pretty tiny. Like, by comparison's sake, I think there are as many people with a project management title at my company that there are with like the 16 main roles you described.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, and we're just one team.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Go for it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. The question was, for a small team of roughly 4, how do you handle quality assurance? Do you handle it internally? Would you handle it externally? What's the best course of action, right? Okay. As I said earlier, I only have about a year of experience, so I don't know too much about like how to answer that. But from what I can tell, most companies pay way too much for outsourced QA. Like you might honestly be better off finding someone like me or another speedrunner who, like, this is their hobby on the side. They just like breaking games. I still do like minor amounts of bug hunting in games like Iconoclasts and then report back to the dev just like, hey, I found this because I was bored. But like I feel you'd be better off finding someone that is passionate about your project if you show it to them and like wants to help you out with that. But especially for a small team, it costs way too much money to hire an outsourced QA company, and even to hire a publisher to do it, it can be very expensive. And like Yacht Club, when they were first testing, they were also their own internal testers, a team of 5. So they would spend 13 hours a day coding. Like, okay, I got to spend another 8 hours testing. So I guess it depends on when you feel you're ready to, I guess, bring on more testers. But I would say reach out to mostly speedrunners. Like, they love that. And then if you find someone that like really likes your game, try and bring them on the side. Maybe not a full-time position, but just like, hey, we need somebody to test this new feature this weekend. Like, can you help us out with that? And then pay them a small stipend. 'Cause that's what Yacht Club did with me for a while. It seemed to help.
Yeah.
I know.
My question would be is, what do you expect them to do? And that's kind of like when you have a new role at a company, it's, all right, you have someone there, they're working, let's say, 40 hours a week or however many hours a week. How do you get them do stuff to QA? How do you get them, how do they give feedback to you? Like, do you have a Jira or a tracking software? If so, like, if you're thinking about pure cost as well, like, you would actually even ask, like, well, how much does a news license cost for that? Actually, you could use Jira for like $10 a month for up to 10 people, I think. So you could use that. But my thing would be is, if you have someone that if you could set up something where someone can give you information in a useful manner, and you can pass off your builds and your new things to test, and still have the information be relevant. So, for example, if you're passing off stuff that needs to be done like that day, then a dedicated QA will be useful, but you have to make sure they're set up to like immediately get feedback. If you're doing stuff long term and you can kind of shift projects, like I finished this one thing, I'll work on this new thing while QA kind of does their stuff, then I think you could really have an efficient pipeline. The biggest problem with QA ends up being that they have so much to test and it's hard to prioritize their time and have them get the information to you in a useful way. Like, if they're just writing up a billion bugs with like tons of granular details, you might spend more time sifting through bugs. If they're writing something too general, then you might not know what you need to do. So it's really like, can you give the QA direction more so than can you just like have a useful QA guy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And like good QA will be able to like spot what you want them to do. And I think it's kind of an instinct thing. It's like if I tell you, hey, we're working on this project, we have 5 days this week to work on it, and we're looking for just critical errors. You might report minor animation bugs, but you won't bring it up to me like every like as a big deal. You'll bring it up. Oh, by the way, the game crashes at these other points. Also on the side, there's a minor thing you can look at it if you need to.
Yeah. Like if Studio and I were making a game and he were the programmer and I were the tester, and like I found a bunch of crashes, like if the protocol were for me to like direct message him on Slack or something and say, hey, here's something that needs to be fixed now, like that's what I would do. And then minor bugs, like you said, with art or like an animation that's wrong, like that can be dealt with later because that's not going to change for a while.
That'll be an email or whatever you end up using.
Yeah, yeah. Like the point is to not stress out the development team with a lot of meaningless, well, not meaningless, but minor bugs.
Yeah, that's something that I guess we can talk about is, so my company, we use Jira, which has a built-in priority system of A blocker, A critical, B major, C minor, C trivial, I think is the default system. And if something is a blocker, it means that it is blocking the release of a feature or, someone from testing. Like it is something so massive that like it has to be fixed. And then it goes all the way down to C trivial, which is like, yeah, this is a thing and it's not right, but no one cares. That could be like, yeah, there's some white space on this word at the very end, and it has literally no effect. So that's a skill that like a QA lead or a project manager would normally have, is to prioritize that stuff. At a small studio, that would be on finding someone that you could train to understand what the priorities are. And I think people are pretty good about this. It can take a little bit of time, but you can work with people really well. I think the biggest thing is if you did look for speedrunners, look for someone's like, don't look for the best time, look for that guy that's just grinding out every bug and documenting them perfectly and just be like, that guy, we need you now. Yeah.
More questions?
Yeah, we got like 10 minutes.
Cool. Anybody? Back there.
Yeah. I know you haven't asked a question, so yeah.
So I'm just curious, if you were starting to be interested in speedrunning or starting to get into speedrunning, do you think it would even be worthwhile to say, like, I'm going to try and start speedrunning these types of games to maybe get a position in the future? Or would that be just a totally wrong game?
If you were getting into speedrunning, should you try and learn specific games to hopefully try and like maybe look for job opportunities tied to them in the future? It's an iffy question because it entirely depends on how interested the company is in the projects. So I think Yacht Club is a good example. They care a lot about speedrunning.
Yeah.
So if you were looking for like, hey, maybe if Yacht Club expands their QA or if Muncha goes up in position or finds up somewhere else, I would love to have a spot. You could like realistically try and learn the Yacht Club game speedruns or whatever the library ends up being.
Yeah.
And then be like a point of contact for them. But I think it really depends. Like I think it's one of those things where it shouldn't be your biggest path. It should be something you do on the side. And you should be doing it because you still find speedrunning fun and it's a good hobby. It's one of those things where it should be a minor bonus instead of like the major bonus, in my opinion.
Yeah, like I only speedrun platformers because I like platformers. Like that said, learning runs or learning games of the same type, like not even speedrunning, but just learning about them. Like if you really like RTS games, you could probably easily get a job testing RTS games because you're familiar with all the terminology and like the typical things that happen in an RTS game. I'm really familiar with platformers, obviously, so I can immediately recognize when something is just not going to work, or is going to cause problems. An example from Iconoclasts is there's a boss that takes you up an elevator. The elevator you are standing on is made with soft collision, and if you jump and fire your gun fully charged upward, it pushes you down through the collision. The developer did not know that when he implemented that feature. So I found that, and his response was wonderful. Was really? Let me get back to you. It's fixed now, but like playing games of of the same type, playing more games of that type will just teach you more about that game. Like Hyper Light Drifter is the only action game speedrun I've ever done. I guess I'd call it an action game, an action adventure. But you know, so I don't know how good I would be at testing something like Bayonetta. I've never done it before. But if like the Ori and the Blind Forest devs wanted me to test something, I might be able to, like, I would more immediately recognize things in their game that will break just because I'm used to that type of experience.
I think you could do Bayonetta. I think it'd just be a learning process of that.
Yeah, like it would just be learning how to do like it's like learning how to play a new musical instrument. The like fundamentals are the same. You just have to learn like, okay, saxophone this way, flute this way.
Action adventure this way now.
You can.
I know you had a question too.
Yeah, I was gonna just ask you, like, what is not divulging any.
Don't break NDAs. Rule for gaming companies: don't break NDAs on recorded anything.
What is your like typical flow of your day like?
For me, it varies depending on. Oh wait, the question was, what is the typical day for like me as a QA tester and for Studio as a project manager?
I kind of went over that before you got here.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
For me, it like varies depending on what we're testing. A typical thing I do is I will update like my internal build of the game to whatever the latest revision is. So like what you know as Shovel Knight version 3.3, I know as version 29,350. And my day consists of download the new build, look for bugs in that build, maybe look for old bugs and make sure they don't occur. Until the team requests me to look at something specific, or like my lead says, okay, we're gearing up to release a new patch for Plague Knight on Xbox, so we're going to focus on Xbox this week. It can vary any day, and some weeks or months you're doing the same thing. For 2 months, I was doing nothing but localization checks in German.
Has your German improved?
9.
Any other questions?
Anybody? Violet. I don't develop any tools myself because I am not a programmer. Oh, the question. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. The question was, do I do all manual testing or do I develop any tools to help test? And no, I don't make any tools. I am not a programmer. Other people do make tools for us, but all of our testing is mostly done manually. So like that block thing I was talking about earlier, guess who had to jump on a block 4,000 times? This guy.
Yeah. We have worked on automated testing, and like it's actually something where there's a lot of really good buy solutions for it, where you can just buy good automated testing, especially for like web-based products. Mm-hmm. So like it depends on the size of the company. We have more resources to spend on automated testing, so we do that. And I think in terms of actual individual games, especially you have to customize it, so it becomes much harder.
Yeah.
So we use the Horizon Zero Dawn as an example earlier. They have a lot of time and a lot of money because they are essentially that game is there to. It was a Sony first party game, so that game's there to sell consoles almost explicitly.
Yeah.
And because of that, they end up having a substantial amount of time to work on and like perfect and really nail down their improvements. Mm-hmm. And that game's really good, so it had a positive effect. But most companies will be like, well, we don't have the money or the time to invest in this one-time use AI for testing, is what I've seen.
Yeah. All right. Think we have time for a few more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
all right.
Like 5
Sir.
minutes.
As for someone who's in college right now, is there anything I could be doing?
If you're in college, what could you do in addition, including courses or stuff on the side, to possibly help with the career in the future? Well, what do you want to do?
Potentially like design or QA.
Design or QA. Have you ever downloaded Unity or downloaded Unreal? Have you made stuff? He said yeah. Have you made stuff in Unity or Unreal?
Yeah.
And he said yeah again. All right, that's kind of what you're looking for. If you could have something, so if you're looking for design, if you could have something where you have a playable demo of some kind, it doesn't have to be perfect, and the art can be absolute garbage, and it can even just be like taken assets from something else. Having something demonstratable is really useful. If you have any specific companies in mind, then having like something closer to their type of game makes a lot more sense. But you don't ever have to have an exact replica as for a lot of entry positions, because they don't necessarily expect you to know a ton, but have a lot of kind of like initiative and drive and be able to work well. I think in terms of courses, having some coding experience helps for everything. So you don't need to be a engineer, but if you were a designer at a company, you'd probably be working with scripts of some kind, most likely. Of just, if thing happens, then this other thing happens. So being able to have a little bit of a coding background would help. So just even like intro to computer science classes can help a ton.
Yeah, like Studio said, it depends on what you want to do. At Yacht Club, like I said earlier, we do various tests of different kinds. You know, like Studio just mentioned, having something designed already is crucial if you're trying to be a designer. If you want to be a programmer, you just need a computer science degree. That'll probably teach you everything you need to know at the basic level, and then it's just learning whatever proprietary thing a company might have. You know, learning common industry tools are great. Unreal Engine and Blueprints are super popular right now. I mean, Game Maker is a very basic tool, but you can now release it on any major console, so that can help if you're a hobbyist. It really just depends on what you want to do. For QA, it's a little like trickier because it's kind of hard to prove that you can do it without just taking a QA test, and it's hard to convince someone that you're worth like giving the test to. So like one thing that I think could help for QA would be like document a bug you found and put it on YouTube and explain how you go about performing it, and maybe send that to the developer. Because again, it's all about building contacts, and like maybe they don't have QA, maybe they know somebody that does, or a studio that needs it. Yeah. So yeah.
I will also say it can be exhausting to apply to a lot of jobs, so you got to make it like kind of as generic as possible. So if you have a bug for a game that you've recorded on YouTube, and you have good repro steps underneath it, you know, you could probably share that unless you have the time to dedicate to multiple games. Because if you send out like 30 applications and you spend 10 minutes on each one, that's just on a bug. That's 5 extra hours of work in addition to every other application aspect. So that stuff can be grinding real fast. But yeah, I think we have time for like one more.
Anybody? Go for it.
Is there any specific example you can think of a bug in Shovel Knight that like made it out into the game and you either like learned about it online or through some video and thought, I can't believe I missed that?
Unfortunately, yes. The question was, is there any bug in Shovel Knight that made it through QA and was released in the public that then we found out about later? When we released a patch earlier, I think it was sometime it was either earlier this year or late last year, we upgraded the game to version 3.3 on PC, and we added in the ability for you to bind your mouse buttons. And we missed a check in QA, and if you were playing it on PC, if you had ever changed your keyboard controls, set them to anything custom, even one key different, when you clicked into the window, it changed all of your keyboard options to left click, and so the default option is when you click into the game, it moves up and selects exit at the same time. No one was happy with me after that for a while, but it was hotfixed later that day, and I learned a very valuable lesson about file storage. Just another bug that it does exist out there in Shovel Knight and Plague of Shadows, just to give you a freebie, is that when you jump as Plague Knight, if you throw a bomb on the same frame you land, it does not reset your grounded value or your grounded state. So the next time you jump, you get the animation of your first jump with the height of your double jump, and it makes it look like you missed one of your jumps or the game didn't read an input. And so that's a common occurrence in games where overriding different states quickly just makes weird things happen. I once turned Shovel Knight pink. I don't know how, he just turned pink. Yeah, I didn't like the repro steps for that one. Question marks?
He's pink now.
Deal with it.
Expected outcome, Shovel Knight is blue. Current outcome, he's pink.
Yeah. Like that can happen a lot when you're implementing new things. Like maybe you'll introduce the same enemy but a new type, and it has a different color palette, and then all of a sudden, like in the Shovel Knight campaign, all of that enemy of that same type has these new properties when they're not supposed to. So, yeah, there can be lots of bugs that that slip through the cracks if you don't know where to look. Most of the time in menus, because menu interactions are dumb. Yeah.
I think just like one last like ridiculous thing is like people make a lot of mistakes, and it's up to these companies to kind of like improve upon them. And I think you have to have kind of a good learning attitude for this stuff. It's just like, yeah, like I think Blizzard had an issue a year ago. I play a lot of Blizzard games, so I bring them up a lot. But like they had an issue you're going, wow, where like the servers are completely messed up, and it was just someone ran a command on live that they thought would have had a minor impact that like affected everything on the servers and just completely broke it. And as far as I know, that guy wasn't fired. Like I never heard any repercussions. It's just like, well, it happens.
Yeah.
And then you just you unbreak the servers and people keep playing and having fun.
Yeah, you forget quickly.
Yeah. Hopefully we did not scare you completely off going for a games job.
I promise it's fun. If you have questions, come find me.
It is fulfilling, but you should ask questions about like yourself when you do it. I think we're out of time.
I think so.
Yeah, Caveman's nodding yes.
All right.
Oh, he says we're okay to keep going. Is that okay to keep? Oh no.
Darn.
Okay.
We tried.
All right. Yeah. This was the Game Job panel. Adios, folks.
Thanks for coming.